Hello watch lovers, today we have an old Longines pocket watch on the bench, and as you might expect, it does have a few issues. So some of the things we're going to do in this video are we're going to fix this balance, we're going to hear a true and insane story about accuracy, and we're going to make a lot of witch brew. So stay tuned. For those who don't know me, my name is Stian, and welcome to the channel. The watch was sent in to me by Alex. It is just a tad bit more than 95 years old. It was sold new in Switzerland on the 25th of October 1928. But we see the crown is coming out, the crystal is missing, and the watch is not running. The watch has this beautifully blued Breguet hands, and it has this nice silver case, which is in fine condition. Bit discolored, but that's how silver is. When we open the case back, we see the Longines FCO logo and also a 90% pureness silver mark. And there we have the movement. First thing we do when the watch is not running is check the balance staff, and no, it should not move around like that. That most likely means that at least one pivot on the balance staff is broken. So let's take the hands off first. Given that the crystal is not there, that's a simple enough thing to do. By the way, I also see that this enamel dial is in very nice condition. There's a little bit of dirt on it, but not too bad, especially considering that the crystal was not protecting it. We can then take the movement out of the case. This is the Longines 18.69 movement. Very sturdy movement. Won Longines a lot of praise and awards back in the day. And it is a beautiful movement. Not heavily decorated per se, but lovely golden color. And not a lot of marks, so that's always good to see. I put the crown back in, so then we can also let down the power from the mainspring. Let's have a closer look at the balance. This balance is temperature adjusted with two materials, and you can also see that it's split, also for temperature adjustment. And those screws that we see along the rim are also then for timing the watch, for changing the center of gravity a little bit. What's important to remember is that back in the day when this watch was made, Longines was a real powerhouse. They were absolutely on the leading edge of watches. Due to the corporate structure of the Swatch Group today, Longines has been kind of relegated to, let's say, entry-level luxury brand. But back when this watch was made, Longines was absolutely up there with the other top brands. And Longines had that position until the 60s. We also see that the center wheel is stuck in the plate here, but that's due to dirt. Of course, these old watches have a pretty simple drivetrain, and there are no complications whatsoever on this watch, which does make a watch like this kind of a perfect watch for learning how to do this. Massively big screws compared to most other watches nowadays. The main issue perhaps is the barrel, and the mainspring is a bit tricky, but apart from that, this is a great watch to learn watch repair on. But as I said before, if you do buy a watch for teaching yourself or learning watch repair, make sure you buy one that is running before you get your dirty hands on it. Otherwise it can be very difficult to find out what the problem is. Alright. We are almost done stripping down this watch. Pretty much the only part remaining is this bottom cap jewel. And this is just a cap jewel, it's not a shock setting. Of course, The lack of a shock setting is most likely also the reason that the balance staff has broken pivots. What I'm doing here, I'm cleaning these jewel holes. The jewel holes are bearings made of sapphire, synthetic sapphire, that all these wheels run in. And that minimizes friction, of course, then together with a little bit of lubrication. But with time, that lubrication turns into kind of jelly and then grimy stuff. So that's why we need to clean it out. The barrel is pretty tough to open, so I have to pry it open with a small screwdriver. That is actually what those holes in the lid are for, but it still feels a little bit rough to do it. And inside we have a very dirty old mainspring. It has certainly been a while since this watch was serviced. This old type of mainspring, I believe they stopped selling them in early November 1928 or thereabouts. Of course, a pocket watch needs a much stronger mainspring than a small wristwatch. But this is the old style of spring. It's just a spiral. And the color also is this purplish, brownish color, which shows that this is a steel spring. So we're going to replace that. With all the parts laid out, we're ready for the cleaning machine. So let's get the baskets out. Let me also take this opportunity to thank all my YouTube and Patreon members. It's really making a difference, guys. Really appreciate it. If you're curious what the membership gives you, you can click the join button below. And don't worry, you don't automatically get charged for that. It just shows you the options with the different perks and benefits. As a member, you get exclusive videos on things like different repair tasks, on where to find resources, where to buy stuff. Also get extended videos of these public ones. And we also have a great community where we can learn from each other. So do check it out. Alright, with the cleaning machine doing a nice job for us, we're going to turn to the main problem with this watch. The balance can pretty much be considered the beating heart of a mechanical watch. It turns left and right and so forth very rapidly. This old watch does that 18,000 times per hour. And that's nearly 500,000 times every day. And every time it does that, it lets the drivetrain a little bit forward, and that's when you hear the tick and the tock and the tick and the tock. And to be able to oscillate back and forth that rapidly, of course there needs to be very little friction. So this axis that the wheel is fit onto is called the balance staff. At each end of the balance staff are very, very thin pivots, typically some 0.1 millimeter thick. Now, saying thick might be a little bit out of place here, 0.1 millimeter thin perhaps. And of course that can snap off very easily when you don't have shock protection. The remedy is to change the balance staff, and to do that we first take the hairspring off. Now here we can see that there are no pivots, so we're going to replace it. Now as a watchmaker, my main goal in life is to buy tools. So obviously I have a tool for this as well. This is a so-called plate tax tool. It's specialized for taking out balance staffs and rollers. So this is a big, heavy balance wheel comparatively. So I'm going to first remove the rivet with a graver on my watchmaker's lathe. And then I can punch it out with a plate tax tool. It should be safe to just punch it out directly on the plate tax, but it should be safe. Sounds like something you're saying immediately before you're doing something you regret badly. Anyway, on the right we have the old balance staff without pivots. On the left we have a new one with pivots. And this little ring we see here is the rivet from the old balance staff. So when we're fitting a new balance staff, we need to use a staking tool. The staking tool has a lot of holes in increasing sizes, and we find the one that best fits the balance staff. And then we center that hole so that any stakes we use are perfectly upright. And then we will simply place the balance wheel on top of the balance staff. The balance staff has a shape that's cut so that you have a balance seat. And that's where you then have to press the balance onto to make sure it's flat. Now, besides tools, there's one thing watchmakers have more than enough of, and that is muscles. Because we get them from hammering. Yes, I understand that might not sound very impressive, but keep in mind that this hammer weighs at least 50 grams. That's 50, eh? So what I'm doing is that I'm first spreading the rivet on the new balance staff with a domed stake. And I'm using this flat stake to press the rivet down onto the balance staff spokes. And that should make it both flat and true. Yeah, that looks just fine. So then we can proceed with putting the roller on. That goes on the other end of the balance staff. We'll put the jewel facing, let's say, 90 degrees perpendicular to the spoke. That way it's easier for us to see the jewel if we need to do any adjustments. And then normally we just press it on with our fingers, but this roller was very tight. So I did have to use the watchmaker's sledgehammer to punish this thing even more. And there we heard the sound change, which means that the roller is tightly up to the balance wheel. And with that, we can put the hairspring back on. Now I did note where the hairspring stud was before taking it off, and that was pretty much aligned with that silver screw on the balance wheel. We will, however, see in a little bit that that's not entirely good enough. But for now, let's put the balance back on the cock. As noted already, there's no shock setting on this old watch. So we have to unscrew the capstone and the regulator from the underside. It is worth noting that this watch has a two-piece regulator, and that is pretty rare for this age. So this is the indicator, or lever it's sometimes called. And this is the regulator itself, the index, that you move to shorten or lengthen the hairspring. These are friction fit under the capstone, so that when you move the lever, you also move the index. But given that you can adjust them independently, you avoid this ungainly sight of the lever being to the left or to the right or almost off the balance cock. Nice little touch. Shows a high-grade mechanism. So I clean the parts again in a degreasing liquid. And then we can treat them with the Epilam. That is to keep the lubrication in place a little bit better. For most of the parts we can immerse them into the liquid. On the pallet fork I'm not going to immerse, I'm just going to dip the pallet jewels themselves into the liquid. Alright, with that we can lubricate the capstone, putting a tiny bead of light oil in the center there. And then we can assemble the different parts of the balance cock. This watch really has not been worked on much. It's quite interesting to see that even on the underside of the cock, where you commonly see quite a lot of marks, there are basically none. The stud of the hairspring, so the outer end basically, goes into this little hole in the cock. And then we secure it with this little screw. The hairspring also needs to fit between an index pin and the boot, and the boot is what we're turning here to secure the hairspring. And the boot got its name for its shape, so I suppose we could have called it Italy.
Papa, I touched this thing that was inside this in the lock, and now I can't get it off my hands.
You have to wash your hands then?
I washed my hands with so much soap, it didn't work.
Alright, so I had to clean and re-lubricate this capstone, but we can now put it back in place. Now these old balance cocks can be very, very tight. They have very thick and sturdy steady pins. So we have to be careful when we press it down. And then we can put the balance back on and see if it oscillates freely. And that looks all right, so then we can continue with the barrel. We're going to put in a new mainspring. You remember the old one was, well, old. For a manual winding watch like this one, the mainspring stays fixed in place. There is a little cutout in the barrel wall that the bridle of the mainspring butts onto. So we first position the barrel so that we know where that little cutout is, and then we can place the mainspring. This watch actually has a T-end mainspring. So at the end of the mainspring you have a couple of prongs, like a T, that fit into these small holes here. And these T-end mainsprings can be pretty tricky to get into the right place. With some experience, you manage to get it closer to where it should be, and then you can gently ease it into the right spot. So while assembling the drivetrain, we can talk a little bit about Longines, the brand. It is, of course, a really well-known brand even today, but it was also a really well-known brand back in the 1920s. I mentioned already that it has this FCO logo in the back. That logo was actually trademarked in 1889, so that's already almost 135 years ago at the time of this video. The EF in FCO was the initials of the owner, Ernst Francion. And if you look at the logo, it's actually quite clear that FCO was the company and Longines was the location of the company. The actual name of the location was Les Longines. That's like a long meadow along the river in Saint-Imier in Switzerland. Just a little bit up the valley from La Chaux-de-Fonds. And Francion pretty soon realized that Longines was a better name than FCO for a company. FCO isn't really all that sexy. So it's been known as Longines ever since. And when I said that it was a well-known brand even back then, there were a couple of reasons for that. First was that Longines was the official timekeeper for the Olympic Games and also a lot of other, let's say, timing-related sports. And they had also established themselves as one of the go-to timekeepers for aviators. So groundbreaking aviators, pioneers like Amelia Earhart, Charles Lindbergh, they all wore Longines watches. And just a year before this watch was made in 1927, so 96 years ago, was the first time someone survived a solo flight across the Atlantic. And that was Lucky Charles Lindbergh. Yes, he was called Lucky Charles Lindbergh. Because back then they didn't have proper navigation systems for planes, so you really needed to be lucky to survive that kind of flight. And of course, the very year this watch was produced, in 1928, Amelia Earhart did the same. And given that both of them wore Longines watches, it was of course a great marketing stunt for Longines. And Lindbergh actually developed a navigator's watch in conjunction with Longines, called the Lindbergh Hour Angle watch. Now, having Lindbergh as part of the name was a bit of a marketing stunt, because the concept was actually developed by a Navy navigator called Weems. In addition to being famous for aviation watches, Longines was also famous for their chronographs. They made the first wristwatch chronograph, and also the first that could measure 1/5 of a second. And in the 1930s, they came up with a stopwatch with a 360,000 beats per hour mechanism. And that means that it could count down to 1/100th of a second. And that's like 90 years ago. By the way, coming from Norway, I remember the Olympic Winter Games in Lake Placid in 1980. The last event of the games was a 50-kilometer cross-country ski race, something that typically took around 3 hours. And in this long, grueling race in 1980, a Swedish skier named Thomas Wassberg was in the lead, but this giant of a Finn called Juha Mieto kept chasing him. Now, mind you, they did not start at the same time. I think Mieto started a few minutes after Wassberg, so Mieto was kind of racing on Wassberg's time at the different milestones. And the lead swung back and forth between them, but when Mieto finally crossed the finish line, he was 1/100th of a second behind Wassberg. After some 3 hours and 50 kilometers of cross-country skiing. Disappointed! So after that, they actually stopped timing down to 1/100th of a second in cross-country skiing. Good decision. So while telling that, what I think is a really fascinating story, we managed to put the keyless works back together, and also the pallet fork. And now we're lubricating the pallet fork and pretty much getting ready for the time grapher. I put just a tiny little bit of lubrication in the center of the exit pallet. So we can put the balance back in and hope and pray that it starts up again. And that is nice to see. And then we can also lubricate the rest of the jewels. In general, we're using thicker oil for the slow moving but higher torque wheels like the center wheel. And then lighter oil for the fast moving wheels. The closer a wheel is to the barrel, the slower it rotates. Whoa, holy 50-kilometer ski race, Batman. Well, the amplitude is alright, but the beat error is not that great and the rate is a little bit fast. So let's first look at the beat error. You can see that the pallet fork is way too much towards the right banking pin here. So we need to turn the wheel a little bit so we get the pallet fork in the middle between the two banking pins. We can see on the right side how much we need to move the stud. So we'll do that by taking the balance off the cock again. And then we're actually twisting the collet in the opposite direction of where we want the stud to go. That increases the length from the stud. And then it's just a matter of adjusting the watch to get a very nice performance. Very high quality movement. So with the watch running nicely, let's get ready to make some witch brew. This watch has an enamel dial, and a really good way of cleaning those is by using denture cleaners. So first we use a non-ferrous material to keep the dial as horizontal as possible. Non-ferrous because if it's ferrous it will rust, and that's not ideal. And I'm not sponsored, but I do remember my good old grandma used to clean her denture at night with one of these tablets. Kind of looks like absinthe. Pretty sure it has about the same health effect if you drink it. but it does clean the dial up nicely. For the case, it is silver, so we're gonna dress a bowl with some aluminum foil. And then we use some bicarbonate of soda or baking soda together with boiling water. And that will clean the silver for us. And moving the case around a little bit as well, so that it has contact with the aluminum foil, also helps clean it. So with that, let's put the dial and hands back on the movement, and then we're going to case the movement. This little thing we're putting on here is actually a little spring. It helps the hour wheel stay in the mesh with the minute wheel when the dial is pressed on. And these hands are just lovely. Very nicely blued. What's important with a watch like this is that we make sure that the hour hand does not touch on the small seconds hand. That is not normally an issue, but that is the main issue that can occur. With the minute hand aligned to the hour hand, we can press the minute hand on as well. And then we also make sure that the minute hand does not touch on the hour hand. And that is parallel to the dial. We will of course also put on a crystal, so we don't want the minute hand to point too much upwards towards the crystal either. That looks fine. So then we can get the second hand in place. And there we go. Before casing the watch, we need to take the crown out again. So we do that by unscrewing a setting lever, about 1 revolution. Not too much, just enough to get it out. And the case cleaned up pretty nicely. There is this little stud in the side of this movement that fits into this little slot in the case. So we simply line that. And as you see, I already put on a new crystal. So with that little stud that goes into the slot in the case, we only need 1 case screw. That is pretty common with these pocket watch movements. And then we are pretty much good to go with the crown secured. There we are. By the time you're seeing this, it's probably already Christmas. I wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Spend some quality time with the ones you love and the ones who love you. Sharing the love and warmth of this most wonderful of times. And if you do happen to get a soft Christmas present instead of the tool you wanted, let it go. There are more tools. And if 2023 wasn't the year you hoped it would be, I can promise you 2024 will be better. I'll be back in 2024. Until then, ta-ta.